Hi, it's Wayne from howtofish.com.au, and I want to show you a couple of little tips and tricks in looking after your gear, presenting things differently. Just a couple of hacks, you could call them, for making your fishing a bit easier or a bit more effective. The first one is basically how to present your rod, how to actually store your rod, and how to make it easier to transport when you've got your tackle connected. If you can see on this particular rod, it's got a little hook there that's physically attached to the rod, and what that does is that's a great place for you to put your hook. If you're lure fishing, that's where you put your lure, the hooks from your lure, so you can transport that. You'll be walking around with it and you know that it's always securely presented there. Now, a lot of rods don't have that. In fact, many non-lure fishing rods don't have it. Spin rods often don't have it. So if I look at this particular rod here, my Bass Red fishing rod, it doesn't have one of those, but that is easy to deal with. All you need for that is cable tie and a ring of some sort. Now, people use split rings for this. I didn't have any split rings, and also this is a rubber ring. So doing some renovations about the house, and there's lots of seals and connections I need to make. So this just came out of a pack of a heap of these, and I'm going to use that to make that secure. So all I do, put your ring through the table tie. Okay, simple enough. Then all you do is basically take that round, run that through around where you want it on the rod, so keep it down towards where you'd keep the reel, where the reel seat is. And as you tighten, make sure that you put the ring where you want it to stay. So I'll just tighten that up a little bit. Okay, I think there would be right. I'm going to hold it there so I can put the hook through to that, and now I just tighten up. Okay, once I've done that, make sure it's nice and tight. Now I've got a secure holder for my hook. If I ever need to, I can always just cut that off with a pair of pliers. What I'll do right now is I'm going to trim that off, use a pair of pliers, just trim that off nice and close without cutting it off the reel, of course. Okay, you can see the dexterity is kicking in here. Okay, nice and flush. And that then is a cheaper version of that there. The next little tip has a lot to do with sinkers. Okay, in particular, swivel sinkers and sinkers with holes in them like that. That can be joined to your line with swivel clips, etc. That's great for being able to take those off when you need to use a different weight. The only trouble is that they come smaller than this, but not much smaller. And if you need just a very, very small weight, but you want to put it onto a paternoster rig, then it's very hard to find sinkers that have a swivel attached. So there's a way around that. So what you can do, the same type of effect can be had with something as small as that little ball sinker there, by simply putting through a piece of wire, hooking it round so that you've got an eye at the top or a circle at the top. You can clip that to a snap swivel so that you have your paternoster rig coming up here, and you've got a very, very, very light weight. So if you want to have as little resistance as possible, you can do this, and all that is I use paper clips for this a lot. They seem to be a perfect size to fit through the small holes or eyes in these sinkers. Okay, and the way you do that is as simple as this. So all you need is a ball sinker and a paper clip. So I've just got my pliers, okay, and my paper clip. All I do is pull that out, start to straighten it up, okay. I leave a little bit of a bend in it so it's easier to use. Get that pretty straight. Then you're able to just thread that through like that. Basically, all I've done then is take the very tip of it, roll a very small ring into it. Make sure that the ring is flush to itself. In other words, there's no gap between that ring, between the circle and the back of the back of the paper clip, so the line can't move out of that. So you've got your circle there. Then the only other thing you have to do is bend that flush with the back of the sinker. So what I'll do is I'll just cut it off, leave a bit of a tag, okay, and that tag then can be, I'll push that down, that little bit of a tag then, I'll just push that down with the pliers, flush against the base of the sinker. Now I have that can be joined to a snap swivel, and so it's easily adjustable. So even if I'm using a running line, so what I've got on this rod is I've got a line stop, but this would have a running sinker on it. I want to be able to change sinkers, that's why I've got a snap swivel there. So the fish can actually pull against that weight and they won't feel anything, and the fish won't feel resistance. So I've got that there. If I want to put a weight on, it's simple. So I've got my snap swivel here coming down to a line stop. So that's where I want to have my weight. All I have to do is open that up and then put it through. It's easier said than done. Put it through, and there I have my running weight. And that can be done with any size sinker. And so that small amount of weight, either as a paternoster where you have this at the bottom, or as a running line, easily attached, and it's hard to get, and I can just then go up and down in size. I have various sizes of these. I can put a heavier one if I need to, a light one, and it's very, very fast to change over. Just take that off, ready to put a bigger one or a smaller one on. Now the next one has a lot to do with this. We all get tangles in our line. I use a lot of fine lines and they do tend to tangle more. Heavier lines are a bit stiffer, don't tend to get as wrapped up. But every angler, every fisherman is going to get knots in his tackle. Sounds painful, doesn't it? What I have done with this at times is, when they're not quite as bad as this, where there's small knots in that, trying to pick them out with your fingers and everything else is a real pain, and what you end up doing is cutting it and starting off, tackling up again. But sometimes there's a much faster way of doing it, and it starts with this. That is actually just a nail. I've had this in my tackle box now for probably about 5 years. You can use a needle, as in a needle for thread and needle, anything with a sharp point on it. Because what that allows you to do, I've just put a bit of duct tape on this so that I can actually, it's easy to hold on to. What it allows you to do is just pick out some of those knots getting in there. It's got a very, very fine point on it. You just pick out and undo some of these knots. And by doing that, if you've got a simple knot on your rod that you can't get to with your fingers, this can push in between the line into the knots, pull them out, undo, and you're ready to go. Happens also when you have a few tangles in your line, or your line has been twisted after a while, especially if you're lure fishing. Occasionally you'll get those knots in your line, okay, all along the line at times. You can pick those out quite easily with something like that, and then it makes the job a whole lot easier. You don't have to actually cut line. You can then basically just start fishing again. Now this tip is pretty sharp. What I use a syringe for, a clean syringe, not one I've found but one that I've bought, is I use this to put a little bit of air into my bait at times, in particular worms. Sometimes to get, especially if you're fishing in silt or where there's quite a bit of dead leaf and a lot of rubbish on the bottom, you've got no choice but to fish into it because you can't find a clear patch. One of the things you can do is lift your bait off the bottom. Now, the larger baits, by just pushing this in and inflating it with a little bit of air, will actually cause a worm to pop up. So even if it's just one end that is moving in the water, what will happen is it'll get a lot more notice from the fish because you've got some activity and movement. Because otherwise, sometimes they're burying themselves in there. So just by injecting a little bit of air into it, you give yourself a much better chance of catching a fish. So this is not for the kids, this is an adults only approach, okay? And you must use clean syringes you've bought from a pharmacy, but it really does work. And I have this in my tackle box at all times because, especially when I go river fishing and I'm using baits like worm, I'll inflate them to give me that little extra advantage. Now this one is just a tip that I've been using. I mean, so many people do this. I take small eskies to keep my bait in. I keep them small because I'm carrying a lot of stuff at any given time, so I don't want a huge amount of stuff to burden me with. So a small esky like this works really well. To keep things cool, you need something cold. I've lost so many of those freezer packs, it's just not funny. So over time, I've tended to look for containers that will do the job. So I've got this container here. It's starting to melt now, but this has been here pretty much. I've come back from fishing probably about 5 or 6 hours ago. It's still very, very cold. It fits nicely in the corner. It has kept everything cold around it. But to make it extra cold, what I did is when I added water to it, I added salt to that. So I just used about a tablespoon or two to a litre of water. What it does is it lowers the freezing rate of the water, makes it colder. And if you keep things in a solid block, they are colder for longer. Crushed ice is very good, but what it does is it melts faster. So if you create a slurry, so if you're out fishing on the boat, often the guys will just pull in some water, salt water, ocean water, and put it into their live well or into an esky with ice. And what it does is it keeps very, very cold. Colder than fresh water does. Fresh water will freeze out. So I keep things like that. And whenever I'm out, I try to find containers or bottles that are a nice square shape so they fit in properly or they fit in easily. I usually put this in my larger esky. Do the same thing. Put 3/4 fill it with cold water with some ice in it. It freezes for ages. Really, really simple. And then I use much smaller bottles for this esky here. If I don't have if this is too big, I'll use smaller bottles, yay big, or soft drink bottles, small soft drink bottles, to keep that water in with salt to keep it at the lowest possible temperature. Now this idea sparkles. I've just got a hook here, okay? It's a size 2.0 hook, but what you'll see is I've wrapped some wire with tinsel on it. This is the type of stuff you can get at party shops, at $2 shops. It is just simply a piece of wire with tinsel on the outside of it. What that does is I've run that up the shank of the hook. I can put a bait down here, and the bait typically will be concentrated around this part of the hook. That part of the hook there is getting attention all the time. Red is a really good color because it is the color of blood, it draws attention, it's a lot different to other colors in the water, and you've got a bit of sparkle as well. So if you want to jazz up your hook, that's the way to do it. And the difference between catching and not catching is sometimes just a little bit of tinsel. And the last thing is this. Having a permanent marker like this is a great idea when you've got your gear and you want some things to stand out. So I will sometimes run this along my line, probably about 3 or 4 centimeters, the tip of my line, to get attention with the fish. I'll sometimes run it onto the hook itself and change the color of the hook. I'll sometimes put it on a sinker and just color that red so it gets noticed. Or if I'm using a lure, sometimes I just color part of the lure with a little bit of texture, with a little bit of this. The red color can make all the difference in getting your bait or lure noticed. So always have one of these in your tackle box. If you've enjoyed these tips, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe to get my videos that I put out each week with tips on fishing, with how to catch fish, with when I'm fishing out there, the techniques I use. And if you're interested in gear, if you're interested in the rods that I have, the burley that I have, some of the special formulas I have and cheat sheets I have on fishing, go to my website, howtofish.com.au. Thanks.